When the fires died down and the longships slipped back into the fog, the song stopped. The feast was over, and that was when the real consequences of defeat began. History remembers the Vikings for their raids, their ships, their gods, and their warriors. What it rarely remembers is what happened afterward, what happened to the women left standing in halls that no longer belonged to them. Not farmers' daughters, not villagers, but noble women, queens, abbesses, princesses, and the wives of kings. Their fate was not accidental. It was deliberate, calculated, built into the machinery of conquest. Victory did not end with gold and silver. It ended with people, and in the Viking Age, noble women were among the most valuable prizes of all. This is not a story of romance or rescue. It is not a tale of shield maidens rising in glory. It is a record of what followed when protection failed and power changed hands. A story preserved in annals, sagas, bones, and silence. A story that reveals how status could vanish overnight, how identity could be stripped away, and how lives once lived in authority were reduced to commodities in a brutal economy of force. To understand the Viking Age honestly, we must look past the spectacle and into the shadows. And in those shadows, we find the noble women history almost forgot. At the dawn of the 9th century, the Irish coast was no stranger to fear. Monasteries burned, ports were looted. But in the year 821, a single line entered the annals that revealed something colder than destruction. It recorded that Etar modern Hoth, guarding the northern entrance to Dublin Bay, was ravaged by heathens, and that many women were carried away into captivity. No names, no lament, just a statement of fact. Etar was not an accidental target, it was strategic. A fortified peninsula controlling access to trade routes and coastal movement. When it fell, its wealth was taken. But wealth, in that moment, meant people. Noble households were dismantled in a single act. Women who had been born into rank, protected by lineage and alliance, were reclassified under Norse law as thralls' property rather than persons. Their journey began on the decks of longships packed not with warriors, but with human cargo. The Atlantic crossing was unforgiving. Exposure, hunger, disease. Not all survived. Those who did were delivered to markets that formed the backbone of the Viking economy. Dublin, then known as Dyflin, was one of the largest slave hubs in Western Europe. There, noble women were inspected, priced, and sold. A healthy young woman could fetch between 12 and 20 ounces of silver, the annual output of a small farm. Some were purchased locally, others were shipped onward north to Denmark, east to Sweden, or south through river routes into the vast slave systems of Byzantium and the Abbasid Caliphate. Skills, once tied to status, textile work, healing knowledge, literacy, only increased their market value. The annals do not record their names. They became numbers, entries, and ledgers, their previous lives, erased in favor of utility. They were confiscated, cataloged, and absorbed into an economy that treated human beings as movable wealth. Occasionally, however, a name survives, and when it does, it feels like a voice breaking through centuries of silence. Around the middle of the 10th century, an Irish princess named Melkorka was taken in a raid. She was the daughter of Muirchertach, a king of Ireland. Her capture ended one life and began another entirely, transported across the sea. She was placed for sale in a Norwegian market, where she was noticed by Heskoldur Dalakarlsson, a wealthy Icelander traveling under royal sanction. He asked her name. The trader claimed not to know it. Heskoldur paid 3 marks of silver, 24 ounces, a staggering price, and with that payment, Melkorka disappeared from history. As a princess and re-emerged as a concubine, she spoke no word for years. In the Icelandic household where she lived, she appeared mute. It was not illness, it was resistance. Silence was the only thing left she could control. In a world where her body, her future, and her freedom had been taken, speech became a boundary she refused to cross. Years later, by chance, her secret emerged. Heskoldur overheard her speaking softly to her son beside a stream, teaching him Gaelic. In that private moment, she told him the truth of his lineage. Confronted, she revealed who she was. Her position improved slightly, but freedom never came. She remained in Iceland until her death. Her son grew powerful. He returned to Ireland, met his grandfather, and was recognized as kin. The bloodline was restored. But Melkorka never returned. Her life ended far from her homeland, a captive whose identity survived only because she had whispered it to a child. She was bought, hidden, and exposed by accident. Not all noble women endured captivity. Some faced a choice so extreme that survival itself became secondary. In the year 870, the great heathen army marched north into Northumbria. Among their leaders were men whose names still echo in legend. Their target was Coldingham, a monastery perched on a cliff above the North Sea. It housed both monks and nuns. The abbess, remembered as Pebe the Younger, understood exactly what awaited them. Raids on religious houses were notorious. Looting was expected. So was violation. For these women, shaped by a worldview where bodily desecration carried spiritual ruin, the threat was unbearable. Pebe gathered her community. According to later chroniclers, she took a razor and cut away her own nose and upper lip. Then she commanded the others to do the same. "Make yourselves a horror to them," she said. One by one, the women obeyed. When the Vikings broke in, they did not find victims begging for mercy. They found women who had already chosen their fate. Enraged, the invaders sealed the building, stacked timber against the walls, and set it ablaze. The monastery burned with everyone inside. Their decision was not between life and death. It was between two kinds of endings. They chose the one they could control, burn, bury, unbroken. A century later, in 1011, the city of Canterbury fell after weeks of resistance. Betrayed from within, its gates were opened to a Danish army led by Thorkel the Tall. What followed was devastation. The cathedral was desecrated, much of the population slaughtered. The city's leaders were seized. Among the captives were noble women abbesses, household members of officials, women whose survival was not a matter of mercy, but of calculation. They were held alive as leverage, hostages in a negotiation conducted with silver. For months, they existed in uncertainty, their fate tied to decisions made in drunken halls and council chambers. Archbishop Ulfhere refused to allow a ransom for himself. He was killed for it. The women endured. Eventually, an enormous payment was agreed upon, 48,000 pounds of silver. One of the largest ransoms in European history, their release was part of the bargain. Their lives were spared, not because they were valued as people, but because they were valuable as assets. They disappeared from the record afterward, their suffering reduced to a line item in a financial transaction. In the same year that Coldingham burned, another event unfolded that revealed the industrial scale of Viking enslavement. Dumbarton Rock, the fortress of Strathclyde, stood on a volcanic crag above the River Clyde. For months, it resisted siege. Its walls held. Its defenders fought.